The red sun hung low over the alien marketplace, spreading a faint, dusty light across rows of broken stalls. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Metal roofs groaned in the dry wind. The smell of oil, roasted grain, and desperation filled the air. Among the noise of shouting vendors and clinking coins, an alien widow stood quietly, clutching a small sack close to her chest. Her skin was pale lavender, marked by faint scars, her dark eyes hollow from too many hungry nights. She had walked for hours to reach this market. Her two small children waited at home, their stomachs empty, their voices weak. All she needed was a handful of food, just enough to survive another day. But prices had risen again. The war had taken everything from her: her husband, her house, her pride. Now even food felt like a dream she couldn't afford. The merchant at the stall, a tall alien with thick scales and a cold glare, watched her count the coins in her trembling hands. She whispered, "Please, maybe this much." Her voice was soft, almost breaking. The merchant sneered. "Not enough. Prices doubled after the last shipment. Pay in full or leave." Her fingers froze. She looked down at the few dull coins, knowing she couldn't argue. Around her, other shoppers began to stare. A whisper ran through the crowd. Widow, beggar, waste. Her heart pounded. She tried to return the small bag of grain, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she murmured, "I can't pay." But before the merchant could snatch it away, a hand reached between them. A human hand. "Keep it," a deep voice said. Everyone turned. A tall human stood behind her, his face half hidden under a hood. His jacket was worn, his boots dusty from long travel. His eyes, though tired, held a strange calm, neither pity nor judgment. He placed a few metal credits on the counter and pushed them toward the merchant. "That should cover it," he said quietly. "And keep the change." The crowd went silent. Humans were rare here. Many aliens still hated them, still blamed them for the destruction left by the Terran-Vurek War. A few murmured, "He's crazy." Helping one of them? The merchant frowned but took the money without a word. Profit was profit. He dropped the food bag back into the widow's trembling hands. She stared at it, then at the human. Her voice barely came out. Why would you pay for me?" He shrugged, eyes on the ground. "Because you were hungry." She wanted to thank him, but the words refused to come. Pride and fear tangled in her throat. Her people had once ruled over humans. Now one had saved her from hunger. The shame burned deep. The human nodded once and began to walk away, disappearing into the thick smoke of the market. His step was steady, but something in the way he moved, too careful, too quiet, told her he wasn't just a traveler. He carried the weight of many ghosts. The widow stood frozen for a long moment. The food in her hands felt heavier than it should. Every eye in the market still followed her, whispering rumors. She wanted to run, but she couldn't stop glancing toward the direction the human had gone. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from something she couldn't name. Kindness was rare in this world. Kindness from an enemy was unthinkable. She left the market, holding the grain tight to her chest. The walk home was long, through cracked streets where children begged and old machines rusted under the sun. As she passed a broken fountain, she saw her reflection in the dirty water, thin, tired, eyes wide with confusion. "Why would he help me?" she whispered. "Why me?" When she reached her small hut, her children ran to her. Their faces lit up at the sight of food. She smiled weakly and cooked for them, the smell filling the room with fragile hope. But her mind stayed far away, back in the market. The image of that human haunted her. His quiet eyes, his steady voice, the way he paid without asking for anything in return. Later that night, when the children were asleep, she stepped outside. The sky was blood red, the twin moons rising like watchful eyes. She could still hear the distant hum of the marketplace and the whispers of the crowd. Somewhere out there, the human walked alone. She remembered the stories told to scare children, stories of violent humans, ruthless soldiers, destroyers of planets. But the man she saw was nothing like that. He didn't look like a monster. He looked broken, maybe more broken than she was. For the first time in years, the widow felt something different from fear. She felt curiosity. Who was he? Where did he come from? And why did he care? The next morning, she returned to the market. The same smells, the same noise, but her eyes searched for him. She asked a vendor, the human, "Did you see where he went?" The vendor shrugged. That one? He fixed my cart's wheel and left east. Strange man. Doesn't talk much. She turned toward the eastern road, her heart pounding again. Something deep inside told her she needed to find him. Not to thank him, but to understand him. Maybe fate had brought him to her. Or maybe it was something simpler. Two souls, both scarred by war, crossing paths in a place that had forgotten kindness. As she stepped out of the market and followed the trail of dust his boots had left behind, one thought echoed in her mind, stronger than all the fear and shame she had carried for years. Maybe humans weren't monsters after all. The next morning, the market was louder than usual. Traders shouted prices and smoke from cooking fires curled through the air like ghosts. But the alien widow didn't hear any of it. Her thoughts were trapped on one thing, the human who had paid for her food. His quiet tone, the calm look in his eyes, the way he disappeared into the crowd without expecting a single word of thanks. She had lived through years of fear. She had seen humans as soldiers, destroyers, enemies. Yet this one had done something no one in her own colony would have done. He helped her when everyone else turned away. She carried the small bag of grain he had bought her, still half full. Her children had eaten last night with smiles she hadn't seen in months. But her heart refused to rest. It whispered again and again, find him, find out why he did it. So she went back to the market. The merchants noticed her again, whispering behind their stalls. There's the widow, one said. The one the human saved. Maybe he wanted something in return, another muttered. She ignored them and walked straight toward the eastern road, where she had heard he went. Dust rose with every step as she followed the trail of his footprints along the dry path that cut through ruined metal huts and forgotten farms. After a long walk, she found him sitting under a broken water tower, his hands greasy, fixing a small engine with quiet focus. Two alien children stood nearby, watching him work. When the machine sputtered to life, it released a puff of blue smoke, and the children clapped, laughing with pure joy. The human smiled faintly, wiping his hands on a rag. There, he said. You've got water again. The widow froze a few meters away. He hadn't seen her yet. She could have turned back, but something inside her refused to move. She had never seen a human smile like that, soft, tired, real. When the children ran off, she finally stepped forward. Her voice trembled. You fixed that for them? He looked up, surprised. Then his expression softened when he recognized her. You followed me, he said simply. She hesitated, unsure how to reply. I wanted to thank you. For yesterday. He stood, brushing dust from his coat. No need, you needed help, she frowned. You don't even know me. He gave a small shrug. Don't need to. The answer unsettled her. She had lived in a world where no one did anything without reason. Kindness always came with a price. You must want something, she said quietly. The human met her eyes, and for the first time she noticed their color, gray like a storm about to break. I want people to stop starving, he said. That's all. His words struck her heart like a soft blow. He spoke them with such calm truth, as if he didn't even believe he was saying something special. But she saw the scars on his knuckles, the burn marks near his neck, reminders of battles long gone. This was a man who had seen too much. Were you in the war? She asked carefully. His gaze drifted to the horizon. Yes, too long. And my husband, she whispered, died in that same war. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with the ghosts of the past. He didn't apologize or turn away. Instead, he said softly, Then we both lost something to the same madness. Something inside her cracked open, a small space where anger had once lived, now filled with quiet understanding. Before she could speak again, a shout came from the distance. A merchant was arguing nearby, yelling about the human fixing things for free. People were watching now, their eyes sharp with suspicion. The widow took a step closer to him. They don't trust you, she warned. He gave a tired smile. That's fine. I'm used to it. Then he picked up his small pack, slung it over his shoulder, and began walking away. She followed him again, not knowing why. Where are you going? He pointed toward the hills beyond the ruins. There's an old water station out there. If I can fix it, maybe this place will have clean water again. She blinked. You'd do that for them? Even when they hate you? He stopped, turning his head slightly. Hatred doesn't feed anyone. Water does. His words echoed like something sacred. As the red sun began to set, painting the sky in crimson light, the widow watched him disappear over the ridge. She felt her throat tighten. There was something unexplainable about him. This quiet stranger with kind eyes who carried the guilt of a war and still chose to heal instead of destroy. She looked down at the grain in her hands, then back toward the road he had taken. The evening wind whispered around her, carrying dust and memory, and in that moment she made her decision. Tomorrow she would follow him again, not out of debt, not out of fear, but because she needed to understand what kind of human could still be gentle after losing everything. The widow followed the human again the next day. The path beyond the city stretched into dry fields scattered with wrecked ships from the old war. Rusted metal glimmered under the pale red sun. Every few miles a skeleton of a tank or a burned transport reminded travelers of what once was, a world torn apart by hatred and pride. She spotted him kneeling beside a cracked water line, repairing a filter with patient hands. His jacket was old, torn at the shoulder, and his pack lay beside him. He worked in silence, his movements careful and skilled. For a moment she only watched. He looked peaceful, but there was something heavy in the way he breathed, as if every breath was weighed down by memories. When he noticed her, he gave a faint nod. "You again?" She hesitated. "I said I wanted to understand you." He smiled softly. "Understand me? There's nothing to understand. I'm just trying to fix what's broken." She looked at the shattered landscape around them. "Everything here is broken. Then we'll start with the water," he said simply, tightening the final bolt. The pipe groaned and suddenly clear water began to flow. The widow gasped. It had been years since she'd seen clean water running like that. She knelt and touched it with trembling fingers. It was cold and pure. You really did it," she whispered. The human didn't answer. He just stared at the flowing water for a long time, lost in thought. The reflection of the red sun shimmered across his face, highlighting the faint scars that crossed his cheek. She wanted to ask how he got them, but the question felt too personal. Instead, she said softly, "You were in the war, weren't you?" He froze, his hands stilled, his eyes distant. "Yes," he said at last. "I was. Which side?" He looked at her, his gaze unreadable. "The human side, of course. But sometimes, I wonder if there were any sides at all. Everyone lost something." The widow lowered her eyes. "My husband was a soldier too. He never came back." A long silence followed. Only the sound of running water filled the air. The human's expression didn't change, but his voice grew quieter. "Then maybe I've met him," she frowned. "Met him?" He nodded slowly. "There was a battle near the northern ridge last year of the war. A small alien squad got trapped in the valley. My unit surrounded them. Most of my men wanted to finish them. But one of the alien soldiers," he dropped his weapon, "tried to protect the civilians behind him. I let them go." The widow's breath caught. Her husband had fought in the northern ridge. She whispered, "You spared them?" He nodded again. "Yes, but not all my men agreed. They turned on me after that. Called me a traitor. I left before they could report it. Guess that makes me a deserter." For the first time, she saw the truth behind his calm eyes. They were filled with pain, not from guilt, but from all the things he'd done to survive. "Why did you let them go?" she asked. He sighed. "Because one of them was holding a child. And I remembered my sister's little boy back home. He died in the first attack. I couldn't do it again." The widow's throat tightened. She saw it now, the reason for his kindness, his silence, his broken smile. He wasn't a hero or a coward. He was a man who had seen too much death and decided he'd had enough of it. "You saved lives that day?" she said softly. He shook his head. "No, I just stopped taking them." A breeze swept across the plain, carrying the smell of dust and old metal. The widow looked at him differently now. He wasn't just a stranger who helped her. He was someone who had carried the same kind of loss, maybe even worse. Before she could say anything more, a voice echoed from the ridge above them. "There he is!" They both turned sharply. Two alien guards stood there, weapons drawn, scanning the field. The human's face went still. The widow recognized the symbol on the guard's armor. They were part of the local patrol, still hunting human fugitives. The human stood quietly. "Looks like they finally found me." Her pulse quickened. "You should run." He smiled faintly, calm even in danger. Running doesn't work forever. She stepped closer, her voice desperate. You saved me. You saved my people. Let me help you now. He looked at her for a long second, surprised, maybe even touched. Then he nodded once. All right, but we'll need to move fast. The guard shouted again, sliding down the ridge toward them. The human grabbed his tools and motioned for her to follow. They slipped behind a wrecked transport and disappeared into the shadows, the sound of footsteps and shouting fading behind them. As they ran through the ruins, the widow's heart pounded. She realized that fate had tied them together now, two souls from opposite worlds, bound not by war but by what it had taken from them. And somewhere deep inside, under all the fear and dust, a new thought bloomed in her heart. Maybe redemption begins with a single act of kindness. Dust clung to the air like smoke as the human and the widow ran through the ruins. The broken shells of old machines and fallen walls gave them brief moments of cover. Every few seconds, the sharp echo of boots and metal voices chased after them, the sound of patrol soldiers hungry for a bounty. They stopped behind a shattered transport ship half buried in sand. The widow's chest rose and fell with each breath, her hands shaking. They'll find us, she whispered. The human looked calm, his gray eyes scanning the horizon. Not yet. The sun's low, its light will hide us in the glare. He crouched, pulling a small lens from his pack. With quick, practiced movements, he redirected sunlight through the dust, making their footprints vanish in a bright reflection trail. That'll buy us a few minutes. She stared at him, amazed at his control even in danger. You've done this before. Too many times, he said softly. Survival leaves habits. From the distance, the soldiers' voices grew louder. He's close! The human's near the ridge! The widow's pulse thundered. She wanted to hide, to vanish, but she also wanted to protect him, the man who had once stepped in front of her shame and replaced it with dignity. As they moved deeper into the ruins, a shadow crossed their path. A tall alien officer stepped out from behind a collapsed wall, his armor polished and marked with old battle honors. His eyes were sharp, his mouth twisted into a smirk. There you are, he said coldly. The human deserter who thinks he can play hero among us? The widow froze. She knew that voice. Commander Theric, the same man who had led her husband's last mission before he died. Her heart dropped. The human didn't move. His stance was calm but ready, like someone who had faced this kind of moment too many times. If you're here for the bounty, he said quietly, take it and leave her out of it. Theric laughed, the sound dry and cruel. Oh, I'm not here for money. I'm here for justice. You killed hundreds of my soldiers. You burned our camps. I followed orders, the human replied. So did your kind. Theric's hand tightened on his weapon. Do not compare us to you. His eyes turned toward the widow. And you? Why are you with him? Did you forget what his people did? Your husband died because of them. The widow's throat closed. Her husband's face flashed before her eyes, then the memory of the human's tired smile. He's not like them, she said firmly. He saved lives. He saved me. Theric's voice rose with anger. He's a liar. All humans are. They destroy and pretend it's mercy. But the human didn't argue. He only looked at Theric with quiet sadness. You still think war ends with the last shot fired, he said. But it doesn't, it lives here. He tapped his chest. In what we choose next. Theric hesitated. For a flicker of a second, his expression softened. But pride burned it away. He aimed his plasma rifle straight at the human's chest. The widow's scream broke the silence. Stop! She stepped between them, arms wide. Please, Commander. He's not your enemy anymore. The officer's jaw tightened. Move, widow, or you'll die with him. Her voice trembled but didn't break. Then so be it. You once told my husband that bravery meant protecting what's right. I'm doing that now. The market crowd had begun to gather around the ruins, traders, scavengers, children. They whispered and stared as the scene unfolded. To them it was unthinkable, an alien woman defending a human fugitive. The human looked at her, his voice low. You don't have to do this, she met his gaze, I know, but you didn't have to feed me either. For a moment time seemed to hold still. The wind slowed. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the world in red light. Theric's weapon hummed, glowing. Then, from the crowd, an older alien woman shouted, He fixed our water! Leave him be! Another voice joined. Then another. Soon half the market was murmuring in support. Theric's hand trembled. authority slipping like sand through his fingers. Finally, with a deep snarl, he lowered his weapon. "You're lucky," he said to the human. "These people seem to forget what you are. But I haven't." He turned sharply and stalked away, the patrol following in silence. When the last soldier disappeared, the widow let out a trembling breath. Her knees gave out and she nearly fell, but the human caught her, steadying her gently. "You could have died," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes wet but strong. "So could you. Yet you didn't run." He smiled faintly. "Running doesn't erase the past." "Maybe not," she said softly, "but facing it can change the future." As the crowd slowly dispersed, the two of them stood alone in the fading light. A widow and a human, bound not by blood or war but by something far stronger. And somewhere, far behind the hills, thunder rumbled, a promise that peace, like the storm, was coming, but not without a fight. The red sun slipped behind the hills, leaving behind a quiet twilight glow over the ruined market. The air smelled of metal, dust, and fear. The widow stood beside the human, her heart still beating hard from what had just happened. Commander Tharek's voice still echoed in her head, his words full of hatred, his threats heavy with truth. Around them, the crowd began to scatter. No one dared speak now. People avoided looking at the human, afraid that Tharek might return. But the widow saw something else in their eyes, respect, maybe even shame. They had watched her stand in front of a gun for someone who wasn't her kind, and deep down they knew it had meant something. The human wiped dust from his hands and picked up his pack. His voice was quiet but steady. "You shouldn't have done that. You've put yourself in danger," she faced him. "So have you. Every day since you decided to help others." He looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes softening. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Her lips curved in a sad smile. "Then let me choose for myself." They walked through the fading light until the noise of the city was far behind them. The desert opened ahead, painted in gold and red by the setting sun. The human stopped near a half-collapsed barn and dropped his bag. "We'll rest here. You should go home tomorrow before Tharek changes his mind." She hesitated. "And what about you?" "I'll keep moving. I always do." There was a weariness in his voice that sounded older than his face. The widow sat down beside a pile of broken crates. "You fix everything but yourself," she said quietly. He chuckled under his breath. "Maybe I'm beyond repair." For a while, neither spoke. The night grew cooler and the first stars blinked awake in the sky. From somewhere nearby came the distant hum of an old generator. The human pulled a small, worn photo from his pocket, a picture of a young boy with bright eyes. "Your son?" she asked softly. He nodded. "My nephew. He died during the siege. I promised my sister I'd keep him safe. I failed." The widow lowered her gaze. "You didn't fail. War took him, not you." He stared at the stars. "War takes everything, and it doesn't give back." A long silence hung between them. The widow thought of her own children sleeping in their small home, unaware of the danger their mother had walked into. She wanted to go back to them, but her feet wouldn't move. Something about this human, the quiet sorrow in his voice, the strength in his brokenness, kept her there. Finally, she said, "You could stay. In the village, I mean. The people will learn. They'll see you the way I do." He gave a faint smile. "And how do you see me?" She met his gaze. "As someone who's tired of hating." The words hung in the cool air, soft but powerful. The human didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened and his eyes glistened faintly under the moonlight. "If I stay," he said slowly, "they'll come again. They'll bring more soldiers next time. Then we'll face them together." He shook his head, stepping back. "You don't understand. I've run from every world I tried to fix. The war made me what I am, something between enemy and ghost. People can't forgive what they still fear." She stood, her voice firm but kind. "Then maybe it's time someone tried." The human looked at her, speechless. The widow reached into her cloak and pulled out a small silver badge, her husband's insignia. The metal was worn, but it still shone faintly. She held it out to him. This was his. He died believing peace was still possible. If you keep running, that hope dies too. He looked down at the badge in her hand. "That belongs to you." "No," she whispered. "It belongs to anyone brave enough to stop running." For a long time, he didn't move. Then slowly, he took the badge. His fingers trembled slightly as he closed them around it. "Your husband was a good man," he said. "He was," she replied. "And I think you are too." A gust of wind swept through the ruins, scattering sand around them like ashes. In the distance, faint lights appeared, patrols searching the roads. The human turned toward the hills. They'll find me again soon. Then we'll leave together, she said. There's an old refuge north of here. Safe enough for now. He hesitated, torn between gratitude and guilt. If they catch us, they'll kill you. The widow's eyes were steady. Then it's my choice to make. He looked at her for a long moment before nodding. All right. North it is. They walked together into the night, two silhouettes against the endless desert. Behind them, the ruined market faded into silence. Ahead, the stars glowed brighter, as if guiding them toward something neither fully understood. Freedom, forgiveness, or maybe the fragile beginning of peace. And for the first time in years, the human felt something stir inside him, something warm, something alive, hope. The night was quiet, but danger followed like a shadow. The widow and the human moved through the desert under a blood-red moon, their footsteps sinking into soft sand. The air was cold now, carrying the metallic scent of storm clouds. In the distance, faint lights flickered, patrol ships sweeping the horizon with blue search beams. They had walked for hours without speaking. Both were tired, but neither dared to stop. Every echo of a distant engine made the widow's heart jump. The human walked a few steps ahead, his coat blowing in the wind, his movements steady and careful. Finally, she whispered, "They won't stop looking for you, will they?" He shook his head slowly. "No, men like me are reminders of the war, the kind no one wants walking free." She glanced at him, seeing the exhaustion behind his calm face. Then why keep helping people? Why not just hide forever? He looked at her over his shoulder, eyes faintly shining in the moonlight. Because hiding means they win. Every time I fix a water pipe or feed a hungry child, I prove that war didn't destroy everything human in me. His words sank deep into her heart. She understood that kind of pain, living only to keep something good alive in a world that had forgotten what kindness was. The wind grew stronger as they reached the edge of a dried riverbed. The human stopped suddenly, crouching low. "Listen," the widow froze. From far behind came the rhythmic thrum of engines. 3 patrol vehicles moving fast. Blue lights swept the ground closer every second. "They've found our trail," he said quietly. Her pulse raced. "What do we do?" He looked around quickly, then pointed toward the cliffs on the left. "There's an old storage bunker carved into the rocks. We can hide there until they pass." They ran, the widow clutching her cloak tightly to keep it from flapping in the wind. The sand made soft crunching sounds beneath their boots. Behind them, engines roared louder. Blue light cut across the desert like blades. "Faster," he said. They reached the base of the cliffs just as the first patrol light swept across the ridge. The human grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a pile of fallen stone. A narrow tunnel opened behind them, its entrance half covered by vines and debris. He ducked inside, motioning for her to follow. Inside, the air was thick and cold. The narrow passage led into a forgotten storage chamber, rusted shelves, broken crates, and dust thick enough to choke. The widow pressed her back against the wall, trying to calm her breathing. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. The human moved quickly, pushing an old crate to block part of the entrance. Then he turned to her. No sound, no movement. They crouched in silence. Through a crack in the rocks, the widow could see flashes of blue light sweeping past. Shadows of soldiers moved across the sand outside, their voices muffled but close. "Spread out," one shouted. "He can't have gone far." Her fingers trembled. The human reached over and gently covered her hand with his, steadying it. His skin was warm, calloused, alive. She looked up at him. His expression was calm but focused, his breath controlled. A man who had lived too long with danger. Minutes passed like hours. One of the soldiers' flashlights stopped right outside the entrance. A beam of light slipped through the crack and fell across the human's face. He didn't move. Neither did she. The widow's heart pounded so hard she was sure the guards would hear it. The light lingered for a moment, then moved away. Finally, the sound of footsteps faded into the distance. The engines roared again, fading as the patrols moved toward the opposite ridge. The widow let out a trembling breath. "They're gone." The human nodded but didn't relax. For now. He pulled the crate aside and checked the horizon through the narrow opening. The sky had turned deep violet. Dawn was approaching. The widow sat on the floor, exhausted. Her clothes were covered in dust, her throat dry. The human reached into his pack and handed her a small metal flask. "Here, water." She took it carefully and drank. The taste was cold and pure, a rare gift in their world. She smiled faintly. "You always carry water even when you don't have enough for yourself." He gave a small shrug. "Old habit. A soldier learns what matters most." The silence between them softened. The widow looked at him closely, at the lines of pain around his eyes, the quiet strength in his shoulders. She realized then that he wasn't just running from the soldiers. He was running from himself, from all the ghosts that followed him. "You don't have to keep running," she said gently. "You've done enough." He met her gaze, his voice low. "No, not yet," she tilted her head. "Then when will it be enough?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "When people like you stop being afraid of people like me." Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the desert. The bunker's shadows began to fade. For the first time since the war ended, the human allowed himself to sit down beside someone and just breathe. The widow leaned against the wall, her head resting near his shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. In that fragile silence, surrounded by ruin and danger, something new had begun to bloom, something small but real, trust and far away. Beyond the dunes, the sound of engines began again. The hunt wasn't over, but now they wouldn't face it alone. The first light of dawn crept across the desert, turning the sands into rivers of gold. The air was still, heavy with the quiet that comes after a storm. Inside the hidden bunker, the human sat against the wall, half awake, listening to the widow's soft breathing beside him. For the first time in years, he felt a strange peace, fragile, like glass, but real. When the sunlight reached the doorway, the widow stirred. Her eyes blinked open slowly, reflecting the red glow of morning. "We made it through the night," she whispered. He nodded, rubbing a hand over his tired face. For now, the quiet stretched between them. Outside, a small wind whistled through the rocks. It sounded almost like the world itself was sighing. Tired of chasing, tired of hate. The human looked at the open desert and then back at the woman who had risked everything to stand beside him. "You should go home," he said finally. "Your children need you." She shook her head softly. "Not yet," he frowned. "You can't stay here. It's too dangerous," she gave a faint smile. "Danger is everywhere, but not everyone gives me a reason to hope." Her words struck something deep in him. For years, he had been nothing more than a shadow wandering from one burned world to another, fixing what he could before leaving again. Hope was something he'd buried long ago. Now this alien widow had dug it back up, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The sound of distant engines broke the stillness again. Faint at first, then clearer. Patrol ships sweeping back toward the ridge. The widow's face tightened. They're back. The human stood, grabbing his rifle. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Then this is where our roads part." "No," she said quickly, stepping forward. "You saved my life twice. Let me stand beside you this time." He looked at her, truly looked. This woman with trembling hands but eyes that refused to show fear. "You have a family," he said. "And you don't," she replied softly. "That's why I won't let you die alone." A silence followed, heavy, unbreakable. Then he smiled faintly, a rare, honest smile that reached his tired eyes. "You're stubborn," he said, "so I've been told." They moved to the doorway. The rising sun painted the desert in fiery shades of red and gold. The air shimmered with heat and tension. Far off, dark specks appeared against the sky, ships approaching fast. The human crouched near the entrance and began setting small devices in the sand. The widow knelt beside him. "What are those?" "Old mines," he said, "from before the war ended. They're half dead, but maybe they'll buy us time." She swallowed hard. "You kept them." "All this time," he nodded. "Never thought I'd use them again." When the ships came closer, the engines roared loud enough to shake the rocks. The widow's heart pounded. She looked at him and whispered, "If we survive this, what will you do?" He didn't look away from the sky. "Maybe stop running. Maybe find a place to build again." The first patrol landed. Soldiers poured out, weapons ready. The widow pressed her back against the wall, gripping the human's arm. Then, without warning, an explosion tore through the sand. Fire and dust shot into the air as one of the mines went off. The soldiers scattered, shouting in confusion. The human fired a warning shot into the sky, not to kill, just to scare. "Go," he shouted. "Run north." But she stayed. "Not without you." He turned toward her, eyes fierce. You have to live, Lyra. It was the first time he had said her name. For your children. For the future. Her throat tightened. And what about you? He smiled sadly. Maybe I'll finally stop fighting ghosts. Another explosion boomed closer. Smoke filled the air. She could barely see him through the haze. Please, she cried. Come with me? He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. They ran together out the back of the bunker, through a narrow path between rocks. The rising sun burned above them like a great red eye. Dust swirled around their feet as they climbed the ridge, hearts pounding. Behind them, fire and smoke painted the desert like a battlefield reborn. When they finally reached the top, the human stopped, breathing hard. From there, they could see the endless horizon, gold, crimson, and silent. The soldiers were far below, searching in vain. The widow turned to him. They won't stop, will they? He shook his head. No, but maybe someday their children will. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. And you? What will you do now? He watched the sun rise higher. Keep walking. There's always another broken world that needs fixing. She reached out, taking his hand. Then let me walk with you. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he nodded once. All right. They stood together as the red sun climbed the sky. Two souls once divided by war, now bound by something stronger than blood or race. Down below, the desert wind began to erase their footprints, as if the world itself wanted to protect their secret. And as they walked toward the horizon, the human felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. Not because the war was over, but because kindness had survived it. The widow glanced at him, her voice soft but certain. You said war takes everything. You were wrong. He looked at her, puzzled. What's left then? She smiled faintly. The part of us that still chooses to care. The wind carried her words across the glowing sands. The human closed his eyes for a moment, letting them sink deep into his soul. Then he opened them, facing the horizon once more. Together they walked on, beneath the red sun that had watched both the worst and the best of their worlds. And this time, they walked not as enemies or survivors, but as hope reborn.